Welcome to this edition of the Native News Update on this Monday, August 30th. I'm your host for today's program, Paul DeMain. Many of the stories viewed here can also be found at our website at IndianCountryNews.com. And here are the news stories for the day from the Associated Press and a few other places in Indian Country. The FBI says no charges will be filed in the case of a well-known Native American dancer and singer who passed away along a roadway just outside the eastern edge of Glacier National Park in Montana. Park officials described 30-year-old Clinton Croff of Browning as combative and suffering from multiple wounds just before he died on July 29th. Few other details have been released, including how Croff was injured. Park rangers say they subdued the man, but he collapsed and life-saving efforts were unsuccessful. On Sunday, August 29th, the Union of British Columbia Indian Chiefs and Kamloops Indian Band were sponsors of ceremonies at the C-R-A-B Park Memorial Stone Site for Missing and Murdered. The ceremonies rendered were for an ongoing process of healing and were held as a memorial to the 32 women murdered, several of them American Indian, at the infamous Pickton Pig farm over the course of a decade, and were coordinated by the Salish Shaker Church leaders Eugene Harry and veteran Robert Nahani. Pipe ceremonies rendered for the memorial were conducted by Suquamish representatives Nahani and Kamloops elder Jeanette Jules. Ceremony of food preparation was assisted by Kelly and Joyce White and Joanne Diabo in honors to the 32 late sisters and over 300 participants that came. If you'd like to contact any of the representatives that had been here this last weekend, you can get that information from Kelly White, director of the Crab Water for Life Society, at kellywhite4@gmail.com, and we'll put that email up so you can get it written down. The compelling new film, Hearing Radmilla, will show twice at the Navajo Nation Museum in Window Rock, Arizona on Saturday, September 4th. The screening will take place at 3 p.m. and 6:30 p.m. Immediately following the screening, there will be a question and answer session with Radmilla Courte and director Angela Webb. Hearing Radmilla, it's an 82-minute documentary, a portrait of Miss Navajo Nation 1997 through 1998. The film takes the viewer on a journey from Radmilla's childhood in Leeup, Arizona, through her controversial reign as the first biracial Miss Navajo. It then examines her growing singing career and the realities that lead to serious legal consequences. This documentary chronicles a story of triumphant success and tragic heartbreak, profound love and harrowing violence. It is much more than a narrative of one woman's path. It is truly a life-affirming story for everyone. The popular Berenstain Bears cartoon characters will soon be helping bring the Lakota language to life in homes across the region. 20 episodes of the animated cartoon series will be translated into Lakota and broadcast on South Dakota Public Television starting in the fall of next year. It is the first time in the United States that a cartoon series has been translated to a native language and widely distributed, says Wilhelm Maya, executive director of the Lakota Language Consortium, a nonprofit that partnered with the Standing Rock Sioux Tribe to co-produce the Lakota version of the series. And today we talked once again with Shoshone-Bannock tribal member Mark Trahant, who is now finished with his year-long series on Indian healthcare, and a final view from him about what might the future of healthcare in Indian country look like. Welcome to the Native News Update, Mark Trahant. You're ending your series on healthcare and all the little tangible webs that it spins, and where do we end with this series on healthcare? How does it all end, and where do we go from here?
Well, it kind of ends with an optimistic view that there are some challenges ahead, but there's some great opportunities ahead. And creative, innovative folks out in Indian country can use this as an opportunity to take advantage of those and to try to do some new things.
And what kind of things do you see Indian country doing?
Well, the big one is if you look at the data now, roughly 16% are IHS-only users, and on top of that, another 12% are listed as uninsured, so it's about a third. Under healthcare reform, all of those folks will have essentially insurance cards through Medicaid, and for the first time, they'll be able to go anywhere. And so maybe it's IHS, but maybe it's not. Maybe it's taking a look at a competitor and saying, you know what, this is where I can get better service. And I think that very choice is going to have profound implications for the system.
You see some huge infrastructure development in Indian country around healthcare.
Right. I mean, the tribes in the Great Plains have been reluctant to use 93-638 or self-governance. And I think now they really ought to take a look at that again. Maybe they'll ultimately conclude not to for a lot of reasons. But the economic equation has changed significantly.
It doesn't prohibit, for example, a tribe going to an off-reservation hospital service and forming some kind of a partnerships, perhaps.
Correct. And that's a really good example because it costs a lot of money when somebody goes into an emergency room. And by forming a partnership, you can get people into care facilities that may be open longer, that may be situated in a way where people will want to go them rather than the emergency room. And so that becomes in the hospital's interest. And the hospital then can work out a partnership to help pay for that. Another big shift with healthcare reform is it's now in the state's interest to work to make the Indian health system better. For example, if that person goes into an IHS-related facility, the state is the provider of Medicaid, they will get 100% federal match basically forever. If that same person goes into a private care facility and uses that Medicaid card, the state then has to pay their match. And so for the first time, you have an incentive for the state to really get this right and to work with tribes.
In some cases, the states really don't have any involvement with tribes, from my understanding. Is that correct?
No, but they need to. Now they've got, there's 36 states that have, basically the way Medicaid money works is it goes through the state. And so IHS would bill Medicaid, but that essentially would bill the Medicaid office in whatever state that's located. So now you have states in a new partnership that basically we need to get this right, that we need to make sure the states are doing their job.
Is there anything that precludes the state and federal government, Indian Health Service, and all these cooperating agencies from having a system in which non-natives can walk into an IHS clinic and get services?
It's happening already, and I suspect it'll happen more often, particularly in rural areas. One of the ways it can happen is for the tribal unit to create what's called a federally qualified health center or a rural clinic, and then you can basically take whoever comes in and bill them appropriately and so you become the provider, and the bill in question is a separate one.
To some extent, when you're talking about these issues and everything, I've engaged in discussions with other people in the healthcare, and it seems like after a year and a half of studying this, that to some extent you are now the expert on options. There's some, I mean, really, there's some people in
Right.
Indian Health Services that don't seem to have the a vision for the options that are going on around the country.
Yeah.
And so, what are you going to do with your columns? Are you going to package them up?
I am going to package them up as a book just for people that want them as a resource. And occasionally I'll still write about the issues, even though the series is ending, because I think it's extremely important. This is really a one in a 100-year opportunity, and the better we get this, the less we'll have to kind of redo things later on.
Do you see anything independent being developed around the Indian Health Service? It seems the paradigm now is around a federal administrative agency. Do you see a independent, even perhaps nonprofit or for-profit entity being developed between different tribes? You see any ideas?
Possibly.
Like that?
I've heard some rumblings of such a thing. One of the opportunities would be, and this gets really complicated, but if you make 133% of the federal poverty level, you could get private insurance that would be subsidized. And if you package that with the IHS, you could have a pretty good package for not very much money. And I've heard of some tribal groups talking about trying to create an insurance company that just does that, reaches out to those people in the 133% plus income levels, which is about, for a family of four, in the top high 40s.
That's interesting. bringing everyone into the system in some way, form, or fashion. You can't argue that the services aren't available through some kind of a conduit.
Right, and that's the key, is in this system, between 2014 and 2019, almost everybody will have some sort of coverage, and that's what changes things.
Is this all sustainable, or is some of this going to be overturned with time? We've got interesting elections coming up here, and there's some people who are against all this stuff that seem to be making their way through the primaries and up to the general election.
Well, and I think it's important to call them on this. There is absolutely no chance that they could overturn it in this election. None. They just don't have the votes. The Senate, even if they took control of it, you still need 60 votes for a bill and 66 to be to veto, and you can certainly see that this president's not going to change his mind. Longer term, the changes are being implemented by the states, and it's going to be awful complicated to pull it apart. Yes, it could happen, 2014 at the earliest, but it's going to be awfully complicated to take away health insurance from people for the first time who have it.
Right. I would imagine that some of those people are going to balk at it, and it's going to be a difficult thing to overturn. In fact, by 2014, people may be able to analyze this and see whether it needs to be tweaked or whether it needs to be repealed for obvious reasons.
Right. Well, and because of demographics, we have to bring the cost of healthcare down. I mean, there's just no other way around it, and this is kind of the best shot we have to do that.
What's the opposite of not bringing the demographics down?
We no longer have a United States.
Well, it's interesting. The question is we come to the point where we say we're going to allow people to die, we're allow people to have these problematic things and not have insurance, those kinds of things.
The opposite is we just don't have enough money.
Of not having good health care in a country where children pass away for simple things that could have been prevented. It almost seems like there are some people who are saying, let's go back to that. That just happens to be God's way of thinning out the population or something like that. You ever see that happening?
No. But I think the flip side is we kind of alluded to the economics of it, is the system we have now is not sustainable. And it's not just that people aren't being covered, which is certainly important, and we can do better, but that the system as it's now structured will collapse. I mean, the fact is we just have a larger population of older people, and it's so weighted that it's never before been like this in history. And unless we get the system back into some sort of equilibrium, there's just not enough tax money in the world to pay for it, no matter what we do.
Right. It sounds like they're going to be facing that issue on a number of fronts, Mark. So I'm sure Indian country is going to want to keep its eye on its earmarks and what they're going to get. You going to be able to keep a little bit of an eye on that for us?
Oh, yeah. I'll be writing about general ideas now, so that's the kind of thing I'll be looking out for.
Okay, we'll touch base.
Every Monday.
Oh, okay. You're going to be writing about it every Monday now?
Yeah, just a regular column on all kinds of issues.
Okay, well, we'll keep in touch with you on that, and we'll get back to you if something breaks on this healthcare stuff. But we appreciate your time. Touch base with you soon again.
Okay, take care.
That is the latest roundup of news from Indian Country on this edition of the Native News Update. We want to thank you for joining with us. Come back again soon.